All right, we are getting ready to do the Brampton shorts from Itch to Stitch, and I've made these shorts before. I love them. They're cute and cozy. I am not going to put the patch pockets on the back, and I'm not going to make the sash or do button loops because I don't wear a sash or use the pocket in my back. I don't want anybody adding anything extra. And yes, this is one of these it's a full-size pattern. It comes full-size. It's not taped together, but it is a heavy paper pattern. So the first thing we're going to do is the side pockets, and we have notches here on the pocket that correspond to the notches on the sides of the pant, the short front and back. Additionally, this is black crepe, and it looks the same on both sides. When I have a fabric that's the same on both sides, when you can't tell the right side from the wrong side, I pick one side, and then when I cut them out, I put pins in them, because even though they look the same now, if I sewed them together, there might be a little bit of a difference of a weave from one side to the other, and then if the light hits it, they look a little funny. So I always try to keep the same side, you know, as the right side, whatever side you happen to choose. So I want to mark my pieces of my shorts with the notches that correspond to the notches on the pocket. So I'm going to do that with pins. You can use chalk, whatever works best for you. I like pins because it's just fast and it's quick when it's done. All right. So this is the back, the pants back. And I'm going to open this up so it's right sides out. All right, this is my right side. And then also, additionally, I need to mark the pocket. And I do exactly the same thing. I just put the pocket there and mark my notches. Please don't cut into the sides of your fabric. Cutting into the seam allowance of a fabric is not really good practice for the fabric. So I've marked, so there's 4 pocket pieces here. So this is the right side of my pocket, and I'm putting it to the right side of my shorts, lining up those notches, and then I'm going to stitch from the top of the pocket to the bottom of the pocket. I can take all these extra pins out now. I don't need them. So I'm going to stitch all 4 of the sides and pockets together, and I'm actually going to serge them because this crepe is really ravelly. But you could use a zigzag, or you don't even need to finish them depending on what kind of type of fabric that you use. The seam allowance on these pants is 1/2 inch on this pattern. So I want to sew this pocket at 3/8 of an inch or a 1/4 of an inch. I want it to be less than the seam allowance because I want that seam to roll in, and we're going to understitch the pocket so it stays in place. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch all of my pocket pieces to my pants pieces, and we'll come back and talk about understitching. All right, I want to talk about front and back for a second. When you sew these pockets on and you have all these pieces, sometimes you get a little confused about which is the front and which is the back. And if you look at the 2 pieces of tissue and I line up this waistband's edge, you'll see that this back piece is longer and lower than the front piece because we are shaped very differently in the back than we are in the front. So if you're at all unsure which piece is which, you can just take a look at them side by each, and you can tell right away that these 2 are the front 2, and these 2, like these are the front 2 because they're shorter, and then these are the back 2 because they're longer, because that's important. When you sew them together, you don't want to sew 2 fronts together. You want to sew a front to the back. Now you'll notice that I have serged in white, and that's because I abhor changing the thread in my serger. So I just serged with the white. Now I've sewn my pocket, and because I'm doing side pockets, I serge the edge now before I sew the pockets together because it's just easier. You can actually serge the pockets too before you put them on the outside edge. I will do them after I sew them together. That's fine with me. I like to sew the edges of the pockets together. The next thing I want to do is I want to understitch this section here of the pocket. So I press it flat and then press it open, and this has actually been pressed, but this crepe is very bouncy, so understitching is really important. And what that means is I want to run this through the machine and hold it open and stitch the pocket to the seam allowance. And what it ends up looking is like this. All right, so you can see this line of stitching very close to my seam, and it has stitched the pocket to the seam allowance. So that helps hold it in place. It also gives you a really nice finish on the pocket edge. Right, that's the edge of my pocket where my hand is going to go in when I've finished it. All right, so now we are going to sew the side seams. And these are my two back pieces, and I'm going to open them up so I know that these are both the back sides, so we don't sew the wrong ones to the wrong sides. And then I'm going to take my two front pieces and I'm going to put them right sides together with my back, thusly matching them up. So this is the seam that I want to sew. So I'm going to pin the top edge and pin the bottom edge. And then I want to line up that seam that I stitched, because I want to sew, when I sew my pocket side, when I sew my side seams and I sew around the edge of the pocket, I want that seam to be inside the seam allowance. I don't want to see it. So it's important that I line those up. And then when I stitch, grab my pocket piece here. When I stitch this, I'm going to start here up at the waistband and stitch down. They have me stitching down to this notch, right? And stopping. You want to back tack there. And then you pick up again at this notch and stitch down to the bottom edge. And then you want to go and stitch all the way around the outside of the pocket. That's important. Okay, so this section between the two notches is where your hand goes. So we want to leave that open. If this isn't big enough, you can move these notches out a little bit. It's not, you know, it's not written in stone. What I like to do is put 2 pins there, and that tells me that's where I'm going to start and stop, so I don't keep sewing along my merry way by mistake. But also I want to make sure, so my seam allowance is a 1/2 inch. I want to make sure that that understitching seam is inside my seam allowance, because I don't want to see it, right? I want that to be inside the pocket. It's functional. It's not a fashion statement. So I'm going to sew both of the side seams on each piece, and I'll have a back and a front sewn together at the side seams and stitched around my pocket bag here. I'm going to do that too. Okay, we sewed the side seam to the notch, right? Here's our notch. We sewed the side seam to the notch, sewed the side seam, you can't see because it's in black thread, from the notch down, and then stitched all the way around the pocket. You're gonna have to forgive my serging. I'm having a battle with my 3rd thread right now, and it goes for about 100 stitches, and then it decides it doesn't want to go any further. So in order to open up this pocket, we want to have the pocket lay nice and flat towards the front. And remember, the front is the shorter crotch line than the back. So we want this pocket to lay nice and the seams to lay nice. And you have a couple of options. You can press the seams both to the front, which tends to be my preference because then you're not cutting into the seam. The pattern does suggest clipping into this back seam here, clipping it there and clipping it at the top of the pocket, and then you can press these seams open and press this pocket forward. Not necessary. You can just press all the seams forward and then you're all set for that. Now the next step we're going to do is we're going to put the right sides together and we're going to sew the front to the back at the inner seam, the inner leg seam, which is this seam here. Now remember, I've often had students say to me, oh, if I line them up, they don't match. So if I take the side seam that I've just sewn, these seams don't match. One's longer than the other. Right, because the back, our back of our bodies is longer than the front. So we need to pull this forward and line up the top of our inner leg seam and the bottom of our inner leg seam, and that is a quick stitch. We're just going to sew that and finish the edges. I'm going to go fight with my serger, see how that goes. I'm going to do both legs. All right, we sewed our inner crotch seam, and I just don't feel like dealing with my serger, so I used a step zigzag to finish off the edges because this crepe is a little ravelly, and you should have one of those zigzags on your machine. It just goes doot, 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 back and forth. So it works out really well. It keeps the edges in place. Now, they tell you to press both seams to the back. If you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to have this two seams and this big lumpy section in the back and nothing in the front. So my suggestion to you is to press one seam to the front and one seam to the back, because then when we do the crotch seam, you can butt them together. So I have one, this is a leg now, right? So now we have something that looks like this. We have a pocket, we have our side seams, we have our inner leg seam, and this is the crotch seam. So this piece is out, the wrong side is out. And then for this piece, my second leg, I am going to, it doesn't matter which one, I'm going to turn this one right side out and stuff it inside of the other one. Now, when I match up my crotch seam, the top of the inner leg seam that we just stitched, I want to make sure I get it right, and I have pressed one seam to the front and one seam to the back, I can butt these seams up together and get a really nice juncture. If I have both seams pressed the right way, I have all kinds of thickness on this side and no thickness on this side, and it just doesn't make a very nice seam. It's harder to sew. It's harder to get a really good match. So I can match those seams up with one pressed one way and one pressed the other and just wiggle them with my fingers. Then I am going to match the top, the waist edge of one leg. Look at how nice that fits. Just throw a few pins in there because I don't want it shifting around on me. And then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. I'm going to pin the top edge. See how much longer this is? This is the back. And then again, we've cut, because we cut them together, they fit together, and I'm just going to pin the edges here. All right. So now what we have is something that looks like a half a pair of shorts, right? We have this crotch seam here, all the way around here. Our right sides are together. We know that because we put these two seams at the center of the crotch, the bottom of the crotch. We butted those together and all the edges match. So we're going to stitch this, and then traditionally you want to stitch again on a pair of trousers from around this bottom section here. What that does is it reinforces it in case you have a split, you know, a seam lets go. I mean, if you're going to overlock it, or I'm going to do the step zigzag on mine, that will suffice. But when you stitch it, you don't want to stitch it right on top of the stitches you put on. You want to stitch next to the stitches. Two rows of stitches on top of each other are not going to do you any favors. All right, now we pull them apart we should have a pair of shorts. Yay, shorts, woohoo. Without the waistband on, they look enormous, right? Something to consider. This is the front, and there's a curve here, and there's also a curve in the back. And if, just like any curve, if you look at it, you can see, it's hard with the black, I know, but you can see that it's not like very pretty. It doesn't open up. And as much as it pains me to clip things, 1 or 2 clips in the front and the back of your shorts through the seam, and what that's going to do is just look at how much better that seam looks, and it's not even pressed, right? Same thing with the back, especially with the back. If you don't want to do it in the front, that's fine, but especially in the back, just put a couple of clips, 2 but not through. And doing the zigzag stitch helps that tremendously, helps keep it a little bit more secure so it doesn't rip. But look at that, without even pressing, that seam lies so much better, because now the seam allowance has somewhere to go. Okay, so that is something that I always do. All right, the waistband's pretty straightforward. The biggest thing that we need to worry about for the waistband is that the center back, the shape is different for the front and the back. It's a little different. So we want to make sure that we mark where the back is. So I'm going to sew these right sides together on this edge and right sides together on this edge, and that gives me a loop. So I have a waistband loop, right? And I also want to mark where the back is. I want to remember where that back is. So you can put a piece of chalk mark in the seam allowance. I just put a pin here, so I know that when I sew these onto my shorts, that is the back side, because I want the front side, the shape, to be correct. And then also I have finished the edge, the unnotched edge. So that would be, this is the notched edge. I have finished this unnotched edge down here, because that's going to be the part that's inside of my garment. And I just used my step zigzag. You could overlock it, certainly, if you had that. You can also turn it under, and that just creates a little bit extra fabric. So it's certainly not necessary on the inside of the garment, but it's an option. So now we're going to attach our waistband to our pants. Yay! So now I have my back section. I want to put these right sides together, and I want to make sure I have the back of my shorts. And we know that our back is longer than our front. So if you match up the edges of the waistband, waist edge, and you go down to the crotch, you will see that the back is coming towards the front, right? The crotch line is here. So this is the back. So I want to make sure that the back of my facing, which I put a pin on, is on the back of my shorts. So I'm just going to wrap my facing around, right sides together, around the top of my shorts. And I'm going to pin the back section, making one seam go to the left and one seam go to the right. And then I'm going to pin the front section, same thing. And these are right sides together, the right side of the waistband and the right side of the shorts. And then pin all the way around. So these fit really well as I pin them all the way around. When you get to the side seams, you want to make sure that you're folding that side seam and the pocket is going towards the front, because we don't want, if this seam is going this way and you have, the pocket's going to have a lump here, we don't want that. So we want to make sure that we're working our pocket seams towards the front. And then I'm gonna go stitch that on. Okay, we have on a nice stitched waistband, and we pressed the waistband and the seam allowance together going away from the pants, and have understitched the waistband to the waistband facing to the seam allowance. So that, what that does is it attaches them so they're together, and it gives you this really nice roll, right? So you have a really nice edge. Now I do want to mention that the instructions call for interfacing the waistband facing, which I did not do because this crepe is so bouncy. I figured it would have enough structure for for the look that I wanted. But if you want a look with a little bit of structure, then you need to interface this waistband facing, and that will stiffen this up a little bit. So now that I've understitched this waistband, I am going to pin it to the inside of my shorts. And I like to pin up here by the top, because that way I know that I'm going to get it flat the way I want it, right before I pin this edge of the facing down. Because you don't want to end up with something like this, where the seam, it's just not correct. So if you pin the top all the way around, and that you can do this at the ironing board, which works really well because you don't have like multiple layers of fabric, and then go back and pin this bottom area, you should get a really nice flat facing for your waistband. After you've pinned this all the way around, then you want to stitch the facing to the shorts, right? Which is why we need this really nice, smooth facing, because we're going to put a row of stitching in here. It wants you to stitch 1/4 inch from the edge of your finished facing all the way around, except you leave 2 inches open. And that's to slide the elastic in. I like to leave the 2 inches open in the back, because there's stitching, you're gonna have to tack the stitching back and forth. So I sewed the waistband down on the channel, right? This is all sewed down, so I have this big channel here, and I've left a section open. One of the things that you really want to pay attention to is catching the top of your pocket into this seam along the waistband edge, because if you don't, your pocket's going to be flopping around. You also want to make sure that it's facing towards the front when you catch it down. So those are 2 important things. I left my pins up at the top because the next step in the directions tell you to pin the top. So I prefer to pin the top first, especially with something as bouncy as this crepe. If it's cotton and you get a really good press, you might be able to get away with it, but you have to pin the top anyway. So I would say go ahead and do it. And now you're going to stitch 1 3/4 inches away from this top edge all the way around without leaving a gap. And that forms a channel for your elastic. Now, here's the thing. You want to make sure that the band is wide enough for the elastic. I have 2-inch elastic because I prefer that. So my band, my little paper bag waist at the top, is only going to be about 1 inch. It's more like 3/4 inch, but I'm going to stitch that all the way around and then insert my elastic. If you have 1.5 inch elastic, which would be about that big, then the 3/4 inch stitching down from the top would probably be perfect. I do prefer the wider elastic, and I happen to have it because I buy it on a roll. So after you've done that, you take your elastic, you measure your waist, you decide how you want it, and you're going to slide it through, put a pin in it, slide a safety pin, slide it through all the way around. Don't be sure you don't slide out this other end. That wouldn't be good. Make sure it's smooth all the way around, it's not twisted, and then you're going to try them on and see where you want this elastic to come together. All right, so I stitched my very wide casing there. Again, yours can be a little more narrow if you use a thinner elastic. Just make sure it's wide enough for your elastic to go through. Then I fed my elastic through that inch opening there, and you want to make sure that it's flat all the way around, like you don't have any twists in your elastic. And then you're going to, obviously try them on, make sure you're happy with the way that they fit. Then you're going to take your 2 raw ends of elastic, don't let them slide back into your pants, and overlap them. Overlap the ends, and then take your step zigzag stitch and close them up, and then close up, let them slide back in, and then close up that bottom seam, that 2 inches that we left open. The other thing that you want to do after you've gotten that all together, I'm just going to pin these so they don't fall apart, is you want to balance the gathering all the way around the circumference, and then at each one of the seams with the elastic flat and the gathering all balanced, you want to run a stitch through the elastic, stitch in the ditch, they call it, all the way up the seam. And what that does is it keeps the elastic from buckling. It also keeps it from twisting when it's in the washing machine. So that is a really positive thing. That's it for these. I have to throw a hem on the edge. There's no sash or belt loops for me on this one, but that's pretty easy to follow in the instructions. And I'm ready to try these on. Woohoo! So here are our finished Brampton shorts. I have made this pattern a couple of times. I still have another one in queue, and I love them because they're roomy. They're great to travel with the crepe. It's a little bouncy. I've made them out of rayon. They look beautiful. And I have a stretch knit I'm going to try next time. So I don't have a big paperback waist on them. It's very small, and I like a little more gathering in the back than in the front. But you can certainly make a high paper bag waist. They have nice roomy pockets. Give this a little tuck. It's definitely something that is great to just throw on for the summer. They're super comfy, they're super roomy. You could go up and down a size. I went up a size on these because I knew the crepe was going to be bouncy and I wanted something that was a little bit more flowy. Definitely, you know, there's plenty of room there, so they could go down a bit, but I do like them. With the knit ones, I'll go down a size or two, but I like the length just above the knee, and I think that they're super cute.